Hello, Namaste. Welcome to Dev's Hammer Show. This is the flagship program of Indigenous television. Indigenous television is Nepal's, in fact South Asia's first indigenous community television. My name is Dev Kumar Sunuwar. Through this television show, I try to bring the voices of indigenous peoples from around the world, and I try to connect their struggles and successes with one another. In this show, I conduct face-to-face interview or conduct video conferences with guests from different continents, and I try to analyze various contemporary issues affecting indigenous peoples. Today, I have invited a guest from Bangladesh, whose name is Binota Dhamai, who is a chairman of UN Voluntary Fund for Indigenous Peoples, who comes from Chittagong Hill Tracks in Bangladesh. And basically today I'm going to talk about the procedures of UN Voluntary Fund for Indigenous Peoples. First of all, let me welcome to the show Mr. Binota. First of all, I would like to welcome you to the show. And at the meantime, I would like to request you to introduce yourself in brief.
I'm Binota Dhamai. I'm from Bangladesh. Belong to Tripura indigenous community from the southeastern part of Bangladesh. It's called Chittagong Hill Tracks. I have been working on the indigenous people issues since my student life. I would say, well, I was even in a grade 9 in 1993. Since then, involved the rights of indigenous peoples movement in our region. It's called Chittagong Hill Tracks. So since then, my journey has started as an activist for the indigenous people's rights, and at the same time, focusing human rights. So that's my very brief introduction I can give you about myself.
Starting your journey, you also worked in Asian Indigenous Peoples Pact, and you were also UN Indigenous Fellow, and now you are with UN Voluntary Fund for Indigenous Peoples, right?
Before joining to Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact in 2008, I was in the UN Indigenous Fellowship Program in 2007 in Geneva, Switzerland for 4 months. And then I was with ILO for 6 months and then moved to AIPP as a program coordinator of the human rights campaign and policy advocacy. Then after 4.5 years working with AIPP, then I went back to Bangladesh and selected AIPP Executive Council member in 2012 General Assembly. And since then till today, I'm also involved with AIPP as an Executive Council member, representing South Asia, and also looking after the human rights program of AIPP. So that's my engagement. Yes, and then in 2015, I am I have appointed by the UN Secretary General as a member of the UN Voluntary Fund for Indigenous Peoples, and since then I'm there, and this is my second term, first year, and this first year I am selected as the chair of the voluntary fund for this year. So this is the recent update.
As you have been appointed by UN General Secretary as a member of UN Voluntary Fund for Indigenous Peoples, as far as I know, this fund has a history of over 30 years, which was established in the year 1985 to assist representatives of indigenous peoples and their organizations to participate in the UN forums. Could you tell me the purpose of the fund?
Yes, you are right. It was established in 1985, so 32 years ago. The region of support, the region of this voluntary fund formation is to support the indigenous people's representative to attend then working group of indigenous population meeting to enable them to speak their issues, concerns, and rights. Just going a little further, if I say during this time, more than these 3 decades, the fund has been instrumental in ensuring the voices of indigenous peoples are heard in the UN system. The fund supported for the participation more than 2,000 indigenous peoples representatives in various UN processes, including the session of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and the expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous peoples, and also the relevant meetings of the Human Rights Council, for example, Universal Periodic Review and the treaty bodies as well. So if we see also the development over the years for the indigenous people's rights, that has been driven by the indigenous peoples themselves through a united transnational movement. And it has also allowed the indigenous peoples to bring their issues to the attention of the international community. And the grantees of the fund also, they can share, they can establish network, they can do advocate on the issues, concerns they have been facing at the local level, community level, and national level, and that they feel that has need to be addressed at the international forum. Very significantly, I also want to share 2 things for the UN Voluntary Fund. One is the adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In this journey, the UN Voluntary Fund has supported the beneficiaries, indigenous leaders, and activists to participate in the negotiation process on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which was also an outcome in the 2007 September, 13th of September. And also, if we see other outcome is the formation of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, where the indigenous leaders, activists, delegates participated in the negotiation process. That's an outcome in the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues that now more than thousands of the UN indigenous representatives have been participating to this meeting. And if we see also the other significant things is um, the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples. The World Conference was organized by the UN General Assembly in 2014. The outcome document, the process, it was like at the beginning, indigenous peoples willingly they organized their talk, and at the later on, the voluntary fund extended their support to support the voluntary fund benefits, to support through the voluntary fund to the indigenous participants to this UN meeting, this World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, dialogue, negotiation, lobby, advocacy activities. So then we see the outcome of the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples in 2014 is also a significant outcome through the support the UN Voluntary Fund. So if we see also the change now, the development as an outcome of the UN Voluntary Fund is, see the outcome of the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, there is one significant issue is that review the mandate of the expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous peoples. This is one of the outcome of the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples negotiation. So this has already reviewed the mandate of the MRIP. Now, if you see the MRIP mandate, MRIP, I mean the expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous peoples, their mandate, if you see now, it is now more broad than the previous one. So this is how we see the achievement grows gradually. And now there is another negotiation is going on regarding the enhanced participation of indigenous peoples in the UN process. So there's also, if we see the outcome last year we got, where UN Voluntary Fund has also supported the indigenous representatives from 7 regions. Every round of negotiation. So this is still going on, though. But you can see the impact of the UN Voluntary Fund, the way it has been engaged over the years, building the capacity of the indigenous representatives, those who are coming from various regions, and those who are coming from planning process to already in expert level. So there are quite a lot of achievement came through the UN voluntary fund. So this is what we could say that somehow like empowering indigenous peoples to claim their rights. This is the journey of the UN voluntary fund.
I want to know, how does this fund operates, and who contributes to the fund? The fact you say the fund is shrinking, in these situations, how can indigenous peoples utilize this fund and get benefited to make their voices louder at the various UN mechanisms?
Yes, it is. It is a voluntary fund, and the fund comes voluntarily. According to the our rules and procedures, the fund could be private and public partnership, but basically now the fund comes from the member states, the government, and the amount is not really that big. But I will appreciate that government is still are supporting to the voluntary fund. Some governments, of course, they have some. I see some of them show their interest to support the fund, and this is also because they want to see the indigenous peoples in a better position, capacity and all this and that. Some governments also try in their best to support, but unfortunately we don't get all of the member states supporting to the UN voluntary fund. So if you also see our website, there is already a list who are supporting what years. So every year, the maximum number we get supporting to the voluntary fund voluntarily is no more than 16 countries or 20 countries. So it's somehow limited. The number of member states are currently supporting through the voluntary contribution. So this is the challenge for us, even though we want to have a more indigenous participation to this UN process in the expert mechanism, in the permanent forum, universal periodic review process, in the treaty bodies. But we could not support this is because we have a very limited fund. But on the other hand, if we see the amount of the applicants, it's it it's increasing. It's like it's growing. Like for example, permanent forum for all over the region, we receive more than 400 applicants every year. So it's very tough for us to actually choose. Even sometimes we could not select one indigenous representative from one country. This is because of limited of fund. So see, this is a challenge. But anyway, going back to the fund who support, yeah, this is mainly the member states, government, they support voluntarily as per their capacity. Yeah, we are 5 members because when the board first established in 1985, that time the geographical region, we consider 5 geographical regions. So since then, it has not changed. So this is still there. We still represent from 5 geographical region. So my other colleagues, say Asia Pacific region is a Pacific, North America. It's Claire Charter, Dr. Claire Charter, and from South America, including Latin America, that region is Mirna Cunningham from Nicaragua. She is a Miskito indigenous community. And from the Arctic region, Arctic, Europe, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Russia, and to some extent North America and Canada. So this is Anne Morgan, Sami from Finland, And from Africa region is sorry, I forgot his full name. His name is Dial, from Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. So he's from Africa now, representing to the board, and from Asia, I am still there for the second term. So we are 5 members composed, and the chairperson, the chairmanship, we do the rotation annually. So this year has come to my turn, and next year could be most probably either Africa or Pacific could be. I'm guessing. So it based on our discussion, but this is our common understanding. No one will hold the chairmanship more than one term each time. So this is our common understanding, and that's why we have this system. Yeah. So there is the composition of the members of the secretariat. We don't have a permanent staff for this secretariat work. We don't have a permanent staff there, but the OHHR, Indigenous and Minority section, they hold the secretariat, and someone they assign to look after these fund activities, and one program assistant we do have. The program assistant look after all these beneficiaries, their arrangement, their travel arrangement, logistic arrangement, everything. The program assistant look after, and there is another staff assigned by the chief. I mean, assigned by the chief of this section, or through their understanding. So then that person is the one who helping. Yeah. So now it's Morse Flores, and who was also former Indigenous Fellow, now is the coordinator of this Minorities Fellowship Program and Indigenous Fellowship Program, and he is looking after the fun activities along with program assistant Else Monsalve. And yeah, so this is so they are the people from the secretariat looking after, and the secretariat section is the Indigenous and Minority section.
In 1985, this fund was established. Then there was a working group on indigenous populations. The former subcommissions on the promotion and protection of human rights of indigenous peoples in the UN, which drafted the UN RIP. The working group on indigenous populations was replaced by MRIP, which was established in 2008. In 2001, there was another UN mechanism called UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Populations, which was established, and the mandate of fund was extended. Now, apart from MRIP and UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, many other UN forums, such as UPR, have also been opened for indigenous populations, and the mandate of fund again extended. The fact you say the fund is shrinking. In these situations, how can indigenous peoples utilize this fund and get benefited by making their voices louder?
Working on indigenous population actually replaced by the expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous peoples. And oh yeah, then if I go back, this voluntary fund contribution to all this process, of course, during the formation of the permanent forum, that was also indigenous representatives in the discussion. They took part actively, and then when 2006, the Commission on Human Rights moved to the Human Rights Council, then the working group of indigenous populations is reformed as an expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous peoples through an informal consultation in December 2007. So that's where from this expert mechanism has started. Okay, So in terms of the funding, like continuing the fund, of course, while the fund established in the beginning, quite a number of member states, they have contributed fund at the time. Also, the amount was, I assume, was higher than what we receive now. But the good thing is there are a couple of member states, they are consistently have been contributing since the inception of the voluntary fund. They're still doing this contribution. And in the future, I am also very hopeful that there will be many member states come forward to support to the fund. This is because these days the voluntary fund activities, the mandate have been expanding. The mandate of the fund has already expanded expanded 7 times for different activities. And now the recent one is to support the participant in the enhanced participation of indigenous peoples in the UN process. So there's the last one. And most probably this year, again, the fund may expand, the mandate may expand this year also to support the indigenous delegates participating to the Business and Human Rights Annual Session in Geneva. So when it comes from the member states, because this is the member states who are giving us the mandate. So when it comes from the member states, then they also have the responsibility to contribute to the fund in able to support the representatives to attend all those mechanisms, all those meetings. So in that way, I'm very much helpful to get more support from the government, member states, and even from the private entities. We, in our last annual meeting of the board, we discussed about how we can approach to the private entities, and many government actually was also encouraging us to do that, and they are also asking if any way we can also, they can also help to us reaching out to all those multinational companies and the private companies to support the voluntary fund. So I think that in the future, the contribution to the fund will not decrease, will rather increase, but will be gradually. Need to do more hard work, more advocacy work, more network. And our indigenous delegates who have been participating to all those international meetings, they also need to ask them also to contribute to the voluntary fund. Because those who are participating, this is not only for themselves, it's also for, in general, for all indigenous people's well-being. So so the approach have to come from various corners. We were doing our best. We have been doing this, and our indigenous brothers, sisters who are participating, they can also approach in the meeting or whenever they meet all those multinational or the donor agencies. Sorry, the donor agencies.
So, as you are yourself have been following the international activism for many years, how do you see the scope? In 1993, UN declared International Year of Indigenous Peoples. UN also observed 2 international decades of world's indigenous peoples that helped raise awareness about the indigenous peoples to some extent. On the other side, some people see that UN already adopted UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, including international legal binding document known as ILO Convention 169. Thus, many argue that indigenous peoples achieved a lot. They need no more international activism. What is your opinion, whether or not there is a need of international advocacy for indigenous peoples?
In one sentence, I'll say we still need our international advocacy. Why? Because there is an opportunity to do advocacy and network for the indigenous organizations like in Nepal, Bangladesh, or all those countries where the gross human rights violations at the grassroots level facing by indigenous peoples every day, every moment. So who will bring this issue to the international level to get attention to the national level? So this is you, me, who are working at the grassroots level needs to bring it. So that's why the advocacy at the international level is still necessary and still should take part actively. But the important thing is you have to be very much prepared to engage this process. For example, going to the UN Permanent Forum, you are meeting in government, you are meeting with intergovernmental organizations or the UN agencies. So you can easily approach them, ask them for a meeting. Look, I come from Nepal. ILO is what ILO convention we have, and under the ILO convention, these rights we have. So we need to work on that area. How you can help us, right? So that's how you can approach. Like say, for example, you need to approach about the agriculture sector. International Fund for Agriculture Development is there. Intellectual property is a very important area which we don't give much attention. Intellectual property and traditional knowledge. That's another area. You can go and ask the WIPO, WIPO, say, look, we have this situation, how you can come to us. Or the human rights situation, right? For example, you are going to Geneva. You are attending the expert mechanism meeting. So that's also the opportunity to talk with the human rights officers of the different mandate holders, not only for the indigenous peoples, but also the human rights defender. For example, say right to housing. For example, freedom of these forms of discrimination against women. There's also for the indigenous women, right? So see all these actors you can connect. So all this approach you can do when you go to the international level to bring them to the national level. But the important thing is you need to be prepared, and those who is going or who are going there also need to be prepared what they want to do.
Now we have come to the almost end of the show. At this time, I would like to request you to give one-line message to the world indigenous peoples for utilizing this fund, and also a message for the member state to contribute to the fund.
Yes, coming to starting from the donor, from the to the government and also the private entities, um, we 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 must appreciate those government who have been contributing to the voluntary fund, enabling indigenous representatives participate to the international meetings and particularly permanent forum, expert mechanism, and UPR treaty bodies in the council meeting. And definitely we want to have more representatives to those meetings. It is mutually benefit the government and the indigenous peoples. If the indigenous peoples learn something positive from participating in all those international meetings, and if government also contribute them, it's the capacity of the indigenous peoples for their own country indigenous representative as well.
Thank you so much, Mr. Binota Moi Dhamai, for your valuable time and esteemed thoughts you shared with me.
Thank you so much, Malino, and Shobai, getting to all again. Thank you so much.
Today I have come to the end of the show. If you have any queries and feedbacks to the show, you can reach me at indigenoustelevision@gmail.com. Next week we'll come with a new guest in your television set at the same time. Till then, have a nice weekend. Goodbye.